Hi, I'm Brian Landry. I am chef and owner of QED Hospitality based in New Orleans, Louisiana. And do food and beverage in New Orleans, Nashville, and now Claremont, Kentucky with the James B. Beam Distilling Company. We just opened a new restaurant there called The Kitchen Table. So part of the revamp of the campus at their Claremont distillery involved the construction of a brand new restaurant. So it's at a restaurant and an event location where we host all kinds of awesome events, but we've been working very closely with the Beam family, with Freddie No in particular, to develop the menu for the kitchen table. One of the really fascinating things we've been doing is we started a pizza program using the same yeast strain that Jim Beam uses in all of their whiskeys. The yeast that they manufacture for their all of their bourbons has been in the family hands since the 1930s. I was actually caught on the windowsill at Jim Beam's house, and they've been propagating that yeast ever since then, so for almost 100 years. And there's all kinds of awesome family stories about bringing some of that yeast home in jugs on the passenger seat of his Cadillac every day when he went to and from work, because he was afraid he'd lose it. And so being in the land of tornadoes or thunderstorms, fires on a distillery can be super destructive. So protecting that yeast was vitally important. So that yeast is often propagated by making a green beer, essentially. So what we've done is we've taken some of that green beer using that yeast strain, and we folded it into a sourdough starter that we started ourselves. And then over the months and months and months, the bean yeast became more pronounced as a flavor in that starter. So now we have a very strong starter that we're using to make our pizza dough. So every day we feed our starter a little more flour, add a little bit more water, and then incorporate part of that into the pizza dough for the day's production. I think one of the things you'll notice about a lot of the Beam whiskeys, whether that is the Jim Beam line or Knob Creek, Basil Hayden, Booker's, Baker's, there are quite a few, but I think there's a characteristic that you can almost tell it's a Beam product because that particular yeast strain often adds a slightly nutty characteristic. You'll also find that in the pizza dough, where the sourdough starter has all of the traditional characteristics of being slightly tart, slightly sweet, but you'll also get this little hint of nuttiness that I think makes our pizza dough special. Bourbon, which has a pretty robust and strong flavor, is not always the easiest thing to pair with food. But there are certain characteristics that we like to highlight through the use of food. If you think of a traditional bourbon, for example, you'll probably think of the char, you'll probably think of vanilla and caramel, maybe a touch of spice, but then you'll also think of the grains, whether that's corn or rye, sometimes now even brown rice. So I think oftentimes when pairing food with bourbon, we look to a lot of the base foundation flavor profiles that you find in those whiskeys. So cooking on high heat, cooking with smoke, charring things, using sweet corn for balance. All of those things I think become almost natural combinations where we can both have a great whiskey, even if it's a high proof whiskey, but if we pair it with something that can stand up to it, can stand up to that spice and that heat, then we're going to start to find some balance. So cooking our pizzas at almost 800 degrees, you'll see that Neapolitan style pizza dough where the dough will start to speckle and char in certain spots. But then you might have a little sweetness from tomato, or even from like a Mornay sauce on our white pizzas. It's about finding balance between the spice and heat level of a bourbon and then highlighting some of the softer elements like the corns and the grains. Lately, my favorite tipple is a Black Manhattan, which is typically about 2 ounces of favorite bourbon. Lately, I've been using Baker's 7-year-old, partnered with an Amaro. Chinar is slightly bitter Amaro that it has from the essence of artichoke. I love artichokes. I use them all the time in Creole cooking. So a Black Manhattan using Baker 7-year-old, and Chinara is the Amaro. Couple of dashes of Angostura, express a little orange, perfect. Louisiana is such a just wonderful part of the world where food, beverage, and music are just so ingrained into our culture. You know, at lunch we're talking about where we're going for dinner. It's just an amazing place in the world to really just jump into what a culture can be. It's all about gathering around a table. We celebrate just about everything, so we invite you to the party. Come and join us.